In the heart of old Detroit, tucked between abandoned warehouses and half-finished condos, sat a worn-down auto shop that locals still trusted more than any shiny dealership. The sign above the door, Harris and Daughter Auto Repair, was half-faded from Michigan winters and summer storms. But inside, the air always smelled of gasoline, metal, and honest work. That day, 19-year-old Emily Harris stood beside her father's battered red toolbox, sleeves rolled up, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her wrist. Grease streaked her cheek, but she didn't mind. She'd grown up with the hum of engines in her ears and the smell of oil on her clothes. Her father, Bill Harris, was a legend in the neighborhood, as the kind of man who could bring an old Chevy back to life with nothing but a wrench and quiet patience. But times were changing. Bills piled up, and last winter he'd had to sell part of the shop to a man named Carter. Slick suit, shiny watch, always acting like he owned every soul under the roof. Mr. Carter called himself an investor, but acted more like a king, walking in with polished shoes that clicked too loudly on the concrete floor. He didn't respect grease under fingernails or the pride in doing things right with your hands. That afternoon, Bill had stepped out to get parts from a nearby yard, leaving Emily alone to organize the back shelf and sort bolts by size, a job she hated but did anyway because her dad asked her to. She was elbow-deep in dusty drawers when she heard the squeal of tires. Carter's black SUV slid to a stop outside the bay door. He stepped out like he owned the street, eyes hidden behind sunglasses that reflected the tired building like it was beneath him. A flatbed truck rumbled behind him, hauling something covered with a heavy canvas. The older mechanics glanced at each other, curiosity pulling them from their break room. When the cover came off, Emily's breath caught for a second. Under layers of dust and rust sat a piece of racing history, a 1967 Shelby GT500. Its paint long faded, but its bones still solid. The mechanics whistled under their breath. This wasn't just an old car. It was a legend, the kind men spent fortunes restoring just to hear it roar again. But this one hadn't roared in decades, its engine dead for longer than Emily had been alive. Carter looked at the men, then at Emily, and his lips curled into that thin smile that always made her skin crawl. "Boys," Carter drawled, pulling the keys from his pocket and tossing them in the air like they were nothing. "This here is a real piece of work. Been sitting in my brother's barn for 20 years. No one could get her to run. Figured I'd give you all a challenge." The men murmured, hands in pockets, exchanging silent looks that said they'd seen enough of Carter's challenges. He turned to Emily, eyes glinting with something meaner than usual. Or maybe the legend's little girl wants to prove she's not just here to sweep floors. A laugh rippled through the room, low but sharp enough to cut. Emily felt heat crawl up her neck, but didn't let her eyes drop. Carter flicked the keys toward her, and she caught them against her chest without flinching. She could feel the weight of every pair of eyes on her. Old Joe by the tire rack, Marcus by the lift, even Tommy, who'd just come in for a paycheck but stayed because he liked the drama. She knew what they were thinking. She's good, but she's just the daughter. Just the kid with a ponytail who hands her dad wrenches and changes oil. Carter stepped closer, his polished shoes stopping inches from the oil-stained concrete under her boots. "I dare you, sweetheart," he said, voice dripping with condescension that made Emily want to spit on his shoes. "Fix it. Make her purr. Show us you're more than a name on a sign." He leaned back, arms folded, confident she'd back down. Emily didn't move. She glanced at the Shelby, saw the way it sagged on tired springs, the grime caked around the hood latch. Then she looked back at Carter and pocketed the keys. Her silence hit the room harder than any comeback could. Without another word, Emily turned away, walking to the wall to grab her father's work light and the socket set she trusted like old friends. She felt the eyes on her back, the half-smirks, the head shakes, the low whistles of men who'd bet beers she'd fail. But she didn't care. The Shelby sat there like a sleeping beast, daring her to wake it. Her heart thudded in her chest, steady and hot. She knew her dad would be back soon and probably tell her not to waste her time, but she wasn't doing this for Carter. She wasn't even doing it for the shop. She was doing it because she knew she could. The hood groaned when she popped it, dust and grime tumbling onto her shirt. She leaned over the massive block of iron that once roared down drag strips at midnight. She could see it right away. The corrosion, the cracked seals, the way some fool had patched old lines with cheap tape that wouldn't last a mile. She hooked up the shop fan behind her to push the stale air away and let the light catch the worst of it. Her gloved fingers traced the lines, felt where the metal still held secrets that old men and expensive shops had missed for years. The first bolt fought back, rusted and stubborn. Emily gritted her teeth and leaned her weight into the ratchet until it squealed free with a snap that echoed through the silent bay. Someone behind her muttered, maybe a bet changing hands, but she didn't turn around. She didn't need them to see her face, just her back, bent over an engine like her father's had been every day for 30 years. Somewhere inside that mess of pistons and forgotten power, she could feel the heartbeat of the machine, like a whisper through the grease. She wasn't scared, she was ready. Emily's hands moved like they were born to be there, shifting through layers of rust and tangled wires as if she were reading a secret only she could understand. The old Shelby sat silent under the harsh shop lights while the smell of old gas and burnt oil filled the space. Behind her, the other mechanics hovered at a safe distance, half pretending to work, but really just stealing glances. Emily could feel the weight of Carter's mocking smirk from somewhere behind her shoulder blades. She didn't look at him. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Her eyes stayed locked on the puzzle in front of her. She found the first real problem buried behind the carburetor, a hairline crack in the old fuel line, invisible unless you knew where to feel. She tugged gently, tracing it with her thumb, hearing her dad's voice in her head, reminding her that an engine never lies if you listen carefully enough. She reached for the coil of new line she'd stashed under the workbench weeks ago, one of the many bits she bought from her tips at the diner where she worked nights to help cover bills. She cut the piece to length, hands steady, fingers black with grease, her mind miles away from the eyes boring into her back. An hour in, her father returned through the side door, wiping his hands on a rag and humming low under his breath until he caught sight of the open hood. For a second, Bill froze in the doorway, watching his daughter bent over the impossible engine while Carter leaned against the wall like a smug king. Bill's eyes met Carter's, and the older man gave a mocking shrug. Bill wanted to step in, to pull Emily aside and spare her the public gamble, but then he saw her face, locked in that same quiet determination he'd seen since she was 10 and insisted on fixing her own bike chain. He stayed by the door, silent witness to whatever came next. Emily's socket wrench clinked against the edge of the engine block as she loosened a stubborn plug. She could feel the history under her hands. Years of neglect, shortcuts made by amateurs who thought they were smarter than the machine. She replaced a rusted coil, swapped a corroded connector, every motion calm and sure. A few feet away, Carter checked his watch, pretending not to care while his eyes burned holes into the back of her head. The other guys shifted from foot to foot, caught between wanting her to win and not wanting Carter's wrath turned on them next. She stepped back for a second to breathe, wiping sweat from her brow with her forearm. The afternoon sun dipped lower outside the bay doors, long beams of light cutting through the greasy air and setting the dust motes aglow. Emily caught her dad's eyes and gave him a quick nod, small but enough to make his chest swell with a quiet pride he didn't dare show. He just crossed his arms and waited, ready to stand beside her if it all fell apart. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't. His girl knew engines the way some people knew music, by heart, by instinct, by the way it felt when it hummed just right. With a fresh plug fitted and the patched line tightened, Emily dropped the hood back down with a soft thud that echoed through the silent shop. She didn't announce it, she didn't boast or glance at Carter. She just slipped into the driver's seat, the cracked leather squeaking under her weight. She adjusted the mirrors out of habit, even though she didn't need them. For a heartbeat, the whole world seemed to hush, every breath held in the stale, oil-scented air. Carter pushed off the wall, arms crossed tight across his chest, ready to see her fail so he could remind them all who was really in charge here. She turned the key once. The starter coughed, a sputter like an old man waking from a too-long nap. She pumped the pedal gently, coaxing the fuel through the fresh line, whispering a quiet, "Come on, baby," under her breath, like a prayer only the engine could hear. She turned the key again. This time, the Shelby answered. The roar that filled the shop made the walls vibrate. It wasn't smooth yet, but it was alive, louder and prouder than any of the men leaning on their half-finished work ever expected to hear again. A grin cracked across Bill's face. The other mechanics dropped their pretense and inched closer, eyes wide like kids at a fireworks show. Carter's smirk faded so fast it was almost funny, his arms falling to his sides like he'd forgotten how to keep up the act. Emily let the engine idle, listening to the rhythm. Rough, but not dead. She tapped the gas, feeling it respond under her foot. No coughs, no stutters, just raw power clawing its way back from the grave. She killed the ignition and stepped out, wiping her hands on her coveralls, smearing grease over old stains that wouldn't wash out no matter how hard she scrubbed. The shop stayed silent except for the soft ticking of hot metal cooling down. Emily met Carter's eyes dead on, no tremble in her shoulders, no quiver in her voice. "Next time you bet against this shop," she said, voice calm as a Sunday sermon, "bet against something you actually understand." She dropped the keys into his open palm. They clinked against his watch, mocking the gold that couldn't buy him what she carried in her hands. The older mechanics broke the silence first, a low ripple of laughter and a single clap that spread until the whole room filled with it. Bill stepped forward, resting a hand on her shoulder, his eyes shining in the dim light. Carter opened his mouth to say something, but nothing came out. He pocketed the keys and walked out, each step heavier than the last. Emily watched him go, then turned back to the Shelby. She ran her hand along the fender, feeling its heartbeat steady and strong under the faded paint. It wasn't perfect yet, but it would be. She'd make sure of that.